This is your audio test. This webinar will begin in 30 seconds. We're testing the audio so you can get the volume at just the right level for you. This webinar will begin in 20 seconds. And one additional audio test. This webinar will begin in 5 seconds. Hi everyone, this is Trey Roeder. Thank you for joining us for this month's webinar, Managing Project Stakeholders Book Launch. Today we're going to talk about the all-important aspect of managing our project stakeholders for project success. If you've joined us in one of our prior webinars, welcome back. If this is your first Roeder Consulting webinar, it's great to see you. We hope you'll consider joining us every month. The first week of the month, from the 1st through the 7th, we offer our webinars at no cost. If you happen to miss that first week, it's no problem at all. You can go to our archived webinar section and view any of our past webinars for a nominal fee. I'm the president of Roeder Consulting. We are a project management training and consulting firm started in 2001. We've worked with a lot of the largest organizations in the world, but we've also worked with some small organizations, not-for-profit organizations, government entities. So we have a very broad experience of leading change. And specifically today's topic of managing project stakeholders, we've worked with project stakeholders in many different sorts of situations. There is no one perfect cookie-cutter way to manage our project stakeholders. What we can do, however, is develop our skills in managing project stakeholders. As you can see here, I've also written several books. The first one was The Sixth Sense for Project Management, and the second book, which has just been released, is Managing Project Stakeholders. That's what we're going to talk about today. If you have any problems with the platform that you're on, please call WebEx directly. This viewer that you're using, the audio, the slide advancement, all of those things are part of WebEx's system, and you can call them at the number that you see here on your screen. In the US and Canada, their toll-free number is 866-229-3239. And for the many of you who join us from overseas or from other parts of our continent, you can call 408-435-7088. At the end of this session, you will receive one PDU if you are a PMP. And if you're a member of IIBA, this session is also approved for ongoing credits through IIBA. Roeder Consulting is a registered education provider with PMI and an endorsed education provider with the International Institute of Business Analysis. So that enables us to give you ongoing credits for these webinars. Here's how you can claim them. At the end of this webinar, you can click on this link here, post-webinar, and you'll be able to download a copy of the form. Then you go into your respective association's website and enter in the information there. Now we found that in particular with PMI, sometimes it's not intuitive to people once they get into that system how to claim their PDUs. So if you have any questions on that, on this post-webinar landing page, some directions on how to claim your PDUs through PMI. Any questions on that process, any difficulty finding the webinar, we encourage you to reach out to PMI or to IIBA, and they would be pleased to help you. These truly are global webinars. We have people from multiple continents and typically 30 or 40 different countries who join us. I happen to be recording this webinar on May 1st. 2013, this is the day that we launched the May webinar focused on virtual teams. And as of the time I sat down to make this recording, we already had over 350 people since we opened up that webinar about 16 hours ago who have viewed it. So these are tremendously popular. We appreciate your support. And I also welcome you to continue the conversation on Rotor Consulting's LinkedIn group. If you're not already a member, you simply go to linkedin.com, select Groups in the top right-hand corner, type in Rotor Consulting, and you'll see us there. We are the largest group for any online training firm. And each month after these webinars, we begin in engaging open dialogue with you about the webinar. So if you have any thoughts or comments, new ideas that you'd like to offer, that's the best way to do it. And there we can have an open, progressive conversation on how to be successful in our profession. And I use the word profession intentionally. Some people think that project management is not a profession. In fact, we have a conversation going on our LinkedIn group on that very topic. Is project management a profession? And for the most part, people are saying yes, it is a profession. It's something that you need to study, something that is built over time. It's a unique skill set, and this profession is evolving. Let me tell you a story of how it is that Rotor Consulting got into this business and what led us up to talking about managing project stakeholders, and more specifically talking about a brand new chapter in the project management body's knowledge on managing project stakeholders. About 7 or 8 years ago, Rotor Consulting decided to get into the business of training project managers on interpersonal skills. Now, when I started this company in 2001, I didn't start it with the idea of getting into the training business. In fact, we started off as a consulting firm. And as a consulting firm, we focused on helping organizations implement their strategic ideas. And what we found is that one of the key skills that we needed to have to help our clients implement their strategic ideas are these all-important interpersonal skills. We also found that we needed technical project management skills and business acumen. Well, we went out to some of the chapters of the Project Management Institute, and we said, we've done some research, we've done some focus groups. We found that it's very important to manage the people side of our projects. Well, in those early days, we had a tough time getting in front of the chapters. People weren't focused on interpersonal skills at that point. People were still very much focused on this technical side of managing the projects. It was all about creating the perfect charter, creating a work breakdown structure that was ideally set up, measuring earned value, quantifying risk. And I'm not saying that those things are unimportant, but it was clear. It was absolutely clear, and there were and continue to be many research studies that show this. It was absolutely clear that it was that interpersonal side of things that made the difference. So gradually, we started getting the opportunity to speak at one chapter, and then a second chapter, and then PMI invited us to talk at the Global Congress, and then they invited us again to talk at the Global Congress, and then it started getting legs, as they say. We started picking up speed, and more people were talking about the interpersonal side of their projects and how important it was, and how they wanted to be trained on those interpersonal side of projects, and how it's different than general interpersonal skills training. Sure, you can pick up a book that might tell you how to manage people in an organizational setting, but a lot of those books are focused on direct reports, hierarchy, operational management, the traditional setup where you have a manager and people reporting to that manager, and the manager holds the performance review, the manager has an ability to influence the compensation of that person, the manager might be able to give some special year-end bonus or incentive. Well, that's all well and good, and that body of knowledge around operational management is very helpful if that's the way your organization is set up for project management. What we found, however, is that most organizations are set up very differently. The project manager is not someone who has people reporting directly to them. The project manager must lead through other people. So when we talk about managing project stakeholders or a project manager, it's a very different skill set. So in the new book on managing project stakeholders, that's how we pick it up. We pick it up from the perspective of someone who's managing in a project environment, contrasted to an operational environment. Well, anyways, back to the story here. Back to the journey on how we got from most folks not talking about this to now the new chapter in the PMBOK. What began happening is more and more chapters were talking about interpersonal skills. More and more people were talking about interpersonal skills. And we were asking the profession to take a more proactive approach to this. In my first book, called It Sixth Sense for Project Management, I in fact asked the profession to come together and rally around a balanced approach for project management. And the good news is, you did that. You made it happen. We now have in the new project management body of knowledge a brand new chapter, Chapter 13, on managing project stakeholders. Is it perfect? No. Is it going to answer all your questions? Certainly not. But it's moving us in the right direction as a profession. My new book called Managing Project Stakeholders can be purchased directly through Rotor Consulting. If you're an ebook reader, you can also find it at barnesandnoble.com, at amazon.com. It's available in just about any format you can think of, and it's available internationally as well as here in North America. And what this book is really about is telling that story on how the project manager, with their constraints, with their opportunities, can be successful in delivering stakeholder agreement, stakeholder engagement in such a way that delivers project results. Because that's really what we're about here. We're about delivering project results. Now, we've been on the path towards this for a number of years now. The prior version of the PMBOK, version 4.0, had an appendix, Appendix G. And Appendix G was focused on interpersonal skills. Here's what you're looking at here on your screen. On the right-hand side of your screen, you see Rotor Consulting's balanced approach to project management. So you see the technical skills in the bottom left right here. You see your business acumen, which is always knowing what the goal is of our project and how we can achieve it. And then on the top, you see those sixth sense interpersonal skills. On the left, you see what was in Appendix G. Effective project managers acquire a balance of technical, interpersonal, and conceptual skills that help them analyze situations and interact appropriately. Well, that's basically PMBOK's way of saying what we've been discussing for years, this balanced approach. So already we were starting to move in the right direction as a profession. However, this was an appendix. This was at the back of the PMBOK. So what we really needed is something better, something more robust. Well, a couple of years ago, the discussions began about the new PMBOK, version 5.0. And those discussions revolved around introducing a new chapter that had to do with managing people, managing stakeholders, because that's what we call people in the project environment. We call them stakeholders. And this discussion, interestingly, at times was focused on how technical do you make the skill of managing people. All right, so let me go back for a moment here to our balanced approach. You see, we've separated out technical skills, business acumen, and people skills. But this discussion on the new Chapter 13 was, do we in some ways combine the technical skills and the people skills? Because the project management body of knowledge is a technical document. It has processes, it has inputs and outputs, and each thing leads to the next. So there was a feeling that if we have a chapter on stakeholder management, it should have a parallel structure from the other chapters and have inputs and processes and outputs and so on. On the other hand, people don't necessarily lend themselves to that way of thinking. When we talk about managing project stakeholders, it's not like we can take 3 of these and 5 of those and put it in a cauldron and mix it up, and boom, out comes buy-in, an engaged group of stakeholders who can't wait to work on your project. So the attempt of Chapter 13 is to combine the technical and also to start leading us towards some of those interpersonal things. Now, it doesn't go very far into those interpersonal things. It's still mainly focused on the technical, but I believe this is a good development because those who follow the technical process of managing projects now have a chapter on managing project stakeholders. So they need to include into their projects people. And on the other hand, those who are focused just on the interpersonal side of it now should pay attention to those technical things. So here's what this process looked like to create the new PMBOK. Around 2010, 2011, the draft was starting to be put together. And then in summer of 2011, the committee received feedback from reviewers. I had the honor and the privilege to serve as one of the reviewers of Chapter 13. And based on that conversation we just had about combining technical and interpersonal, I wasn't sure what I was going to get. I wasn't sure how that was going to look. When I first saw it, however, I felt like the authors had done a very nice job merging those two worlds of the technical and the interpersonal, the left brain and the right brain, pulling these different parts of our bodies and these different ways that we think and combining them into something a little bit more holistic around managing projects. So in 2011, I got to take a look. I provided feedback, sent it into the committee, and then in March of 2012, the exposure draft came out. And this is in this exposure draft now, anyone in the community had the opportunity to look at the draft version, provide some feedback on it, send in their comments. And then just a couple months ago, in January of 2013, the final version came out. And by the way, for any of you who happen to be watching this webinar in early June, very shortly here, the test is going to flip over. The PMP test is going to flip over to requiring you to have knowledge of project stakeholder management. So that's the journey we're on. Now this journey continues. This isn't over today. You may also notice there's another appendix now in the current version of the PMBOK with more detail even than we had before on interpersonal skills. There's more discussion about this. It's more in the chapters now. There's a lot more understanding that interpersonal skills are important. So this Chapter 13, like the PMBOK, is now, in a sense, a lagging indicator to what's happening in the field. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today are going to be beyond what's in Chapter 13, and perhaps in the next version of the PMBOK, version 6.0, when it comes out, you might see some of these topics that we're talking about in our hour together today. Here's the 30,000-foot view of Chapter 13. It's one of the knowledge areas. So for those of you who are PMPs, you picture You have project scope management, project cost management, project integration management. Each of those are knowledge areas. And now we have project stakeholder management. So there's the use of parallel language here, and it's put in that upfront section where we talk about knowledge areas. This chapter is 24 pages long, and it's divided into 4 subsections. First one is on identifying stakeholders. How do we figure out who our stakeholders are? At face value, that might sound like a pretty simple question, but when you really get into it, and when you look at, and I'll show it to you in a moment here, how PMI has defined project stakeholders, it's a pretty broad group of people, and sometimes it's hard to figure out who these people are, what they're doing to our project. So the first thing we talk about in chapter 13 is how to identify our stakeholders. Then we talk about planning, and then we talk about managing, and then we talk about controlling. So you recognize this language, planning, managing, controlling, is consistent with other areas of the PMBOK. And you can see the technical process sort of flow happening here in chapter 13. So as we come back to managing project stakeholders, just one of the things that I wanted to point out here is how we combine the technical flow and the more interpersonal side of things. So here's one of the things that is already beyond chapter 13, but many have found to be very useful. What you're looking at there is Rotor Consulting's version of the stakeholder register. So in the PMBOK, you're going to see a stakeholder register, which is the place where you document the names of your stakeholders, contact information on the stakeholders, and a couple other pieces of information. What I've done here is added to that some sort of a status of the stakeholder, some sort of priority around them, and where they're at. So in the stakeholder register, what we can do is we not only list who our stakeholders are, but we ask ourselves, is this stakeholder a high priority, a medium priority, or a low priority? Because not all stakeholders are created equal. And the path to success is not to focus all your time on the squeaky wheel. We all have that person in our projects. But that may not be the person that we want to spend most of our time on. So we need to prioritize our stakeholders. We need to categorize our stakeholders so we can manage them in groups if possible. And we also need to know where they're at in terms of level of support. Are these stakeholders supporting me? Are they unsure about my project? Or are they resisting me? And we put all of that into our stakeholder register. So we can now look in one place and we can see not only how to contact someone and which phase of the project they should be involved with, but also what sort of priority we put on them and where they're at in terms of supporting us. So it's a quick check, the central document around stakeholder management that we use to manage those stakeholders. So it's central not only from a technical standpoint, meaning there's process flows that come into it and process flows that go out of it, but it's also central from an interpersonal skill standpoint, where we've pulled together concepts such as buy-in, how to get buy-in, and where our stakeholders are at in terms of buy-in, and we're pulling that softer interpersonal skill into our stakeholder register as well. That's where we're going as a profession. That's where we're going, this more holistic approach in how we think about things. As promised, here's how stakeholders are defined. Let's take a look. This is from version 5.0. Project stakeholders are individuals, groups, or organizations who may affect, be affected by, or perceive themselves to be affected by a decision, activity, or outcome of a project. We always have a great conversation in the classroom on the line that says, perceive themselves to be affected by. And some project managers say, if someone thinks they're a stakeholder, but I don't think they should be a stakeholder, they're not one. And others say, well, if they perceive themselves to be affected by, perception is reality, and they need to include them. Here's how we think about this issue. If they think they're a stakeholder, then they are. But that doesn't mean we need to manage them the same way as our other stakeholders. So this group that perceives themselves to be stakeholders, we want to track, we want to put them on our stakeholder register, but then we want to go through our process to figure out how much time, how much effort we should spend with that individual. Again, because not all stakeholders are created equal. Here's another definition of project stakeholders. At the bottom of your screen here, this comes from my friend Bonnie Biafor, who's written a number of books on project management. And she says a project stakeholder is anyone who has a vested interest in the project. Well, either definition that you use, you can see we're painting this pretty broadly. When you start thinking about all the folks who may be affected by, perceive themselves to be affected by, and we're talking about individuals and groups and organizations, we're talking about decisions and activities and outcomes of a project. This is a pretty big group of people. So we need some organized way to work through that. We can't manage all of these people the same way. I'd like to take a step back here and share with you a story of one of the things that I worked on. And it, I think, is instructive in calling out the specific skills that are involved in project stakeholder management. In other words, I encourage all of us as a profession not to think about project stakeholder management as just one more thing we need to do, kind of like, check the box, I filled out the stakeholder register this morning, I'm good. Instead, this is a skill set that's very robust, that we should invest a lot of time in, that we should just really work on getting right. Well, in this one particular client, there was a strategic plan that had been worked on for some period of time. And the strategic plan needed to be approved by the board of directors. In this particular organization, there was a fairly sizable board of directors. A lot of people with a variety of different perspectives. Some of them are very knowledgeable on the organization, very involved, been around for a long time. Others perhaps newer to the board, out of no fault of their own, perhaps didn't have the institutional knowledge of where the organization had been. And the goal was to earn the support of this board around the new strategic plan. Now already this is a little bit of a challenge, because anytime you've done the work and now you're going to get the support of people to agree with your work, you're less likely to succeed, or you put yourself in a more difficult path than if you can make them a part of figuring out what the answer is. Anytime we can include them and figure out what the answer is together, we're much more likely to get their support, because people support their own ideas. But in this case, the plan had already been developed. It was 90–95% cooked, and it was about getting support. Now, I found in this engagement, my role was understanding stakeholders, learning where they came from, what they wanted, how to help people connect their goals to the strategic plan goals. I wasn't working on detailed Gantt charts or tracking earned value. That was the project. That was my aspect of the project, was specifically looking at the stakeholders. So I tell that story because I think it might be where we're going as a profession. We're becoming a higher level role than we were historically. I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Let's get back to this topic now of categorizing our stakeholders. So I've said a number of times, all stakeholders not created equal. And we've also established that the PMBOK definition and Bonnie Biafor's definition and many other people's definition of stakeholders is a pretty broad definition. So this means we have a lot of people we need to manage. And we can't manage them all the same way. So we need to have some processes, some techniques that we can deploy to figure out how to manage these different groups of stakeholders. This is just one of them here. You're looking at the power interest grid. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you see power. How much power does this stakeholder have? Is it low power or high power? And then on the bottom, you see interest. How interested is this stakeholder in your project? If they have a high level of interest, they're over here on the right. If they have a low level of interest, then they're on the left. So let's put those two together and see what it looks like. Let's start with the top right here. This is a person with a lot of power, and they're also very interested in the outcome of your project. Well, that's someone clearly that we want to manage closely. So of the 4 grids, the 4 places a stakeholder could land on this chart, that grid in the top right is our group of folks that we're going to spend the most time and the most effort on. Let's go to the bottom right here. These are people who don't have a lot of power, but they're still very interested, so we want to keep them informed. Good stakeholder management is keeping these people apprised of what's going on, keep them informed, but we probably don't need to manage them as closely as the folks in the top right. How about the top left here? People with a lot of power, but a low level of interest. Well, here's a question for you. What determines on this power interest grid whether a high power stakeholder is on the left or on the right? Well, if you're saying the stakeholder themselves determines it, you would be right. This is solely a decision that stakeholder makes. This person who's less interested in the top left might wake up in the morning one day and say, you know what, that project is all of a sudden really important to me. I was in a meeting yesterday and things changed, or we're going to buy this new client and that's going to make this project all the much more important, or I had a big IT problem and now we need to fix it. So their decision making is the only thing that's keeping them from moving to the right. So we need to keep these folks satisfied, because anytime they could come over to the right here. And then on the bottom left-hand corner, we have the people who we monitor with minimum effort. Now, I love this. I love this box, and the reason is, as far as I know, it's the only place in the PIM box. There might be one other one that I'm missing. But as far as I know, this is the only place I can remember reading in the PIM box where the PIM box actually telling me, don't spend a lot of time on this. That's real world. We know that we don't have the same amount of time and effort to put on everything. And what we're saying here is, if you have a low power, low interest stakeholder, you want to monitor them. It's not no time. We're still spending some time on this, but it's minimal. So let me tell a story to make this come to life. And if you happen to join us in a webinar a couple years ago, you'll know what this picture is. This is the Miraflores locks of the Panama Canal. And there's a major project underway to expand the canal. This is really amazing when you look at it. Each of these boxes right here is the trailer of an 18-wheeler. Think about how big those are going down the freeway. Look at how many of them there are on this thing here. You also see, you can just barely see it on your screen. There's a cable coming down here, and then it goes right back up here. That cable's going from these trucks or trolleys. It's attached to the ship, and it's keeping it centered as it moves through the locks here. For a ship this size, there's only a foot or two of space on either side of the ship, and you have steel on concrete, so it's not going to be good if they hit each other. Here's another picture of a ship going through. Now here you can see the two locks that ships go through. Well, in this expansion project, they're adding 3 more of these. So you got 1, 2, and then over here, past where the trees are, 3, 4, 5 are going to be added. Greatly increases the throughput, greatly increases the economic impact on Panama. Well, a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to travel to Panama and to speak at their Congress And some of the people that I talked to are project managers on the canal. And in this project, you have environmental concerns because the new locks are going to be more environmentally friendly. They'll use a reservoir system that retains the water as it goes up and down in the locks. The Panamanian government is very interested in this. The canal is the main economic driver, not just of Panama City, but of the country. And many others in the community have a very strong interest in this project, as well as stakeholders across the globe. So let's talk about just a few of those stakeholders, and let's come back to this power interest grid to help connect the dots here. So first, we'll start in the top right corner again. The Panamanian government really cares about this project. They have a lot of power, and they also have a high degree of interest. So if you're a project manager working on the Panama Canal expansion, you're going to want to manage very closely the government. Panama has a very high unemployment rate, and part of the rationale for doing this project was that it would create jobs, not only during construction, but after the canal is complete through the direct employment of people, and also indirectly through restaurants and transportation around the canal and so on. It's estimated to make a very major impact. So an unemployed Panamanian has a very high level of interest on this project. It could make a tremendous difference in their life, from not having a job, not having the ability to pay for what they need, to a life-changing situation where now they're employed, working directly or indirectly around this canal. However, the unemployed Panamanian is probably not going to have as much power as the government. So you can see we have them in the keep informed category. And finally, let's go to the left here. For any boxing fans out there, you might be familiar with a fellow by the name of Spider Vazquez. Spider is a well-known boxer who hails from Panama, and the Spider came out in support of the canal. Now, is he as interested in that outcome? Or said differently, is it going to make as much of a difference in his life as it might to an unemployed Panamanian? Probably not. So we have him over here on the low interest. How much power does he have? Well, actually, we don't know. He might be a high-power individual who can really influence public opinion, in which case we'd manage him up here in the top left. Or he might be someone who's followed, people are interested in him, but he's probably not going to change public opinion on political and economic issues. So it's someone that you monitor. Now, take a step back from this for a minute. We're talking about managing a project. We're talking about managing a construction project. And traditionally, you might say my stakeholders are the people who are going to come in and lay concrete, and the electricians, and the people who want to make sure that it's delivering their business requirements or organizational requirements. My project team, those are my project stakeholders. But look, we talked about the government, we talked about people in the community who are unemployed, we talked about celebrities. So as you think about this definition of project stakeholders that's put forth in the PMBOK, it's really quite broad. And as you think about your projects, you're probably going to find that your list of stakeholders is more broad than you initially believed. And that's going to mean categorization tools such as this. Power and interest is one of a number of categorization tools that we can use to figure out how to allocate our time and our team's time and effort against these stakeholders. Here's one more that you won't find in the PMBOK: power and knowledge. We've already talked about power. Let's talk about knowledge. On the bottom here, I have how much knowledge does this stakeholder have about my project. Now, we're not saying how smart are they. We're not saying what kind of degrees do they have, what books do they read. What we are saying is, specific to my project, how knowledgeable are they? Do they know what we're trying to do? Do they know why we're trying to do it? Are they up to date on the latest challenges that we've had? Are they up to date on our resources, our resource constraints, and so on? And if they have a high level of knowledge and a high degree of power, well, that means things are working. These people have a lot of power. They potentially, if they choose to, could make a difference in our project. So we want them to be coming from a position of knowledge and intelligence. That's common sense, I think. If we want people making decisions on our project, we want them to know what's going on. However, what about the people with a lot of power, but a low level of knowledge on our project? Now that's a problem. So that now becomes our top communication priority. In the power interest matrix that we looked at previously, the top right was #1 priority. In the power knowledge matrix, the top left now becomes our #1 priority. On the bottom right, we see people that we want to keep informed. They have a lot of knowledge, but they don't have as much power. And then on the bottom left, here's our favorite: minimal effort, but still monitoring, still making sure that we have a handle on where these people are. Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier the new role of the project manager and where we're going strategically. Let's talk about that for a minute here, because this is something that there's a lot of discussion on in our profession. Where are we going, and what does the role of the project manager look like in the future? Well, let's go back. Let's go back through history. Project management as a profession, I would argue, I think I could argue, has been around forever. Let me say it differently. Project management has been around forever. As a profession, probably not. But there's always been a need to collect the sticks, put them together, light the fire, keep the fire going, some sort of timeline, sequence of things that need to happen. Well, then we find, coming up into modern history, coming out of World War II, there were sophisticated weaponry systems being developed, and there was a need to get organized around all the different moving pieces, the vendors, and so on. So we started seeing something called project management come to bear as a way to manage very difficult, highly complex sorts of situations. And then in the 60s, we see PMI being started. In the 80s, we see our first project management body of knowledge. In the early 2000s, we see the Agile Alliance starting to come into place, and more talk about Agile, although just like waterfall project management, Agile has been around for much longer than the last 10 years or so. But most of that professional emphasis from World War II up to current has been on the technical side of projects. That's our bottom left here, on the balanced approach. And many still believe that's where the emphasis should be. But that's not how we see it. As we get smarter about this, as we continue to professionalize it, we're seeing that it's up here at the top. It's those interpersonal skills that makes or breaks our projects. So if we call ourselves project managers, and if we say our job is to deliver results for our organizations, what we're saying then is we're really good at managing people. We're really good at managing stakeholders, because it's the people who change, it's the stakeholders who need to use our new system. That's what we're talking about. And that's a very different way of thinking about it and prioritizing it compared to the traditional, my main job is to manage a work plan, and every once in a while I think about the people in my project. So you think about what makes sense for you, you think about your organization, but I think there's a lot of indication that that's where the project management role is going. It's becoming more strategic, it's becoming higher level, and we're seeing other roles becoming more tactical. The business analyst role is a good example. The business analyst role is gathering requirements, and depending on how the role plays out in the organization, it might also be tracking those requirements and making sure that they're delivered. Now, you might say that traditionally it was part of the project management role, but there's this new position being created that's part of that. So that means for the project manager to survive, they need to kick themselves up a little bit higher level in the organization and in how they're thinking about things and in how they're thinking about taking accountability for delivering results. One last thing I want to share with you on the technical side of project stakeholder management. What you're looking at here is the engagement matrix. And by the way, you see these icons in the top right-hand corner here. For those of you who are familiar with Rotor Consulting, you will recognize these icons as our disciplines. We have 6 disciplines that we developed after about a 2.5-year period of research. And this particular discipline here is the chameleon. The chameleon needs to adapt to its environment around, but also you see the circle in the middle here is the core. The chameleon must have a core. You can't always adapt. Project manager can't always adapt. There's certain things that we need to hold our guns on. So under the adaptability discipline, this slide is pulled from our course on advanced project stakeholder management, where we connect each of the 6 disciplines, which are the foundational skills for managing change. We connect those to the project stakeholder management frameworks. So here we're talking about a stakeholder engagement assessment matrix. Stakeholders are listed on the left-hand side, and then we have 5 different ways of categorizing them. Is a stakeholder unaware? Are they resistant? Are they neutral? Right? What's the difference between unaware and neutral? Well, this person who's unaware doesn't really know that you're even doing a project, or if they do, they're not sure what it's all about. The neutral person knows that you're doing a project, understands what it's about, but they haven't stated an opinion one way or the other on whether they support it or don't. Then we have our supportive people moving left to right here, and finally our leaders. What's the difference between a supporter and a leader? Well, in the PMBOK, the supporter is someone who thinks you're on the right track and may or may not publicly advocate that, may or may not be out there telling people that this is a great project and they really need to get behind it. The leader, however, is like an uber supporter. A leader is saying, this is a great project, we have to go in this direction, come on, follow me, and let's make this happen. Or, I know this particular piece is going to be difficult and challenging, we can figure it out, I'm going to lead the way. Now you see some C's and some D's. So a C is current and a D is desired. So in the case of stakeholder 1, there's currently someone who's unaware, and we want them to be supportive. So if it's stakeholder 3, they're currently supportive, and that's right where they want them to be. Another thing we talk about in the class is, can you think of a situation where you would desire someone to be neutral? So they're currently resistant, and you desire them to be neutral. Well, clearly there's going to be some people who really don't like the project. And it might be unrealistic to think we can get them to supportive or leading. But we might say to ourselves, if I can only get that person to neutral, that'll be such a big win for this project, because it'll eliminate that resistance. So if I can get everyone in the center column or in one of the 2 right columns, then I'm really highly likely to succeed, because there's no one working against me. There's just people who are neutral on it, or quietly supportive, or actively supportive as leaders. Now, when I first reviewed back in 2011 the early version of Chapter 13, there was a D under resistant. And I asked, why is there a D under resistant? And now I noticed when the final came out, there's no D there anymore. So I couldn't get my head wrapped around that one, but maybe you could think of an idea why there might be a D for resistant. Not in the PMBOK now, though. If you do think of it, by the way, put it up on our LinkedIn group. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Here's another discipline. We talked about adaptability. I'd like to acknowledge here that this also in large part is about the diplomacy discipline. The diplomacy discipline is about how to work over, how to get over, around, under, or straight through the barriers in front of us in a diplomatic way. we need to deliver results. That's our job. However, research studies show that we are often evaluated not just on what we do, but how we do it. Now, this is particularly exciting. I've seen a lot of motion on this in the last 6 to 12 months. For example, one of the discussions on the Rotor Consulting LinkedIn group is about the empathy of leadership and states the case for the empathetic leader. This particular piece argues that innovation is better with an empathetic leader. So what does that mean for project management? It means that if we're more diplomatic in how we manage our stakeholders, we may not only be doing the right thing, but we may actually be delivering better project results. A lot of dialogue around this now, and I suspect you'll be seeing more of this in the future. Empathy of leaders. This is beyond emotional intelligence. This is something different that we're talking about now. This is how you engage with people and how you create the organizational structure, and really a fascinating way of thinking about things. And it feels like progress as well. It feels like we're moving in the right direction here. So here's the good news. You now have learned some more about project stakeholder management. And if you choose to buy a copy of my book on managing project stakeholders, or take one of our courses, or in some way deepen your learning around project stakeholders, you're now going to bring yourself up to speed on what new people need to learn. So if you're an experienced PMP, people the second half of this year who are sitting for the PMP test are going to know project stakeholder management. You're going to want to know it too. And if you're a new PMP, well, it's going to be required. And if you're not a PMP at all, but someone who manages projects, I believe it's important for you to recognize that this aspect of the interpersonal side of things is going to be increasingly important. In next month's webinar, we will dive into more detail on stakeholder management and share some case studies. And I'd like your help. On our LinkedIn group, you can find a discussion on your experiences with managing stakeholders. I'm interested in you sharing with us whatever it is you want to say about how many stakeholders you have, some of the challenges that you've had in those stakeholders, in managing those stakeholders, some things that you've found to be successful with managing stakeholders. We'd like to hear your stories and your case studies. Now, I won't ask anyone to present here like we sometimes did before, but I may read a few of those comments in the spirit of learning and sharing and having all of us as a community benefit from each other's knowledge and experience. Now, you might see behind me, I have a window behind me here, which is just starting to come clear as the sun goes down, and those shutters banged a little bit earlier. That was a noise that you might have heard half an hour or so ago. It's our sign that the sun's starting to go down. We're getting later in the day, and indeed, we're getting close to the end of this webinar as well. Our featured course this month, no surprises here, Advanced Project Stakeholder Management. This is an 8-hour course, 8 PDU course. It's offered in person if you happen to be in a city where we're running it. It's also offered online. Our online format is 2 4-hour increments. We found 8 hours is a long time to be sitting in front of the computer. We do it in 2 4-hour increments on the same day in consecutive weeks. This is an experiential course. We focus on more skills. There's more ways to categorize. There's more technical and scientific research behind the interpersonal side of managing stakeholders, the neurology behind it, and so on. And we also do 2 case studies, one in the first part and one in the second part, where you have the opportunity to work on and refine with your peers the specific skills required to manage a project stakeholder. Now, I found that you often put more credibility on what other people say about the courses than what we do. And you see at the bottom of your screen here just one of the many comments we've received. This is from a manager of IT programming. He says, in my opinion, the critical topic of stakeholder management is absolutely the key factor for the success of any given project. Very pleased with the content of the course. Feedback from one of your peers. Again, I encourage you to go to our website, pick up a copy of the book, or go to your favorite online retailer. You can get copies there as well, and also electronic versions are available. The book is eligible for Category C PDUs. Category C is self-study. You can't get all of your PDUs from self-study. You need to take courses or do other things to get your full 60 PDUs, but you can get some of them. And by reading this book and by taking the tools and the lessons and applying them at your place of work, you can get additional PDUs. And this is a relatively inexpensive way to do it. Talking about in-person courses, here's where we're going to be in the next month. If you're in the Denver area, we're there almost every month. We have a June 13th course going on in Denver. We'll be right here in Cleveland on June 28th, and in the Fort Lauderdale area on June 20th. If you don't see your city here, keep in mind we have a lot of different online programs. In addition to online live instructor-led courses, such as managing project stakeholders, we also have online on-demand courses that you can take at your leisure based on your own schedule. As we wrap things up here, and if you're looking for that PDU form, there it is. Go to rotorconsulting.com/hostwebinar, and you will see the downloadable PDU form or IIBA form. It's all in the same form here. That form doesn't give you the PDUs. It's your validation if you were to get audited. And you will also see when you go to that link more information on our different programs and how to get the book. That wraps it up for this time. Thanks again for joining us. I wish you all the best during the month of June, and I look forward to seeing you next month as we share some of your stories on project stakeholder management. Take care.